In 2014, a research team at the University of Cambridge put ancient human bones into a micro-CT scanner and found something that made them reconsider almost everything they assumed about human progress. The bones belonged to hunter-gatherers who lived approximately 7,000 years ago. The scanner measured trabecular density, the internal lattice of bone tissue at the joints, the structure that determines how much force a skeleton can absorb before it breaks. What they found was that those ancient hip joints were comparable in density and strength to the bones of a modern orangutan, not a modern human athlete, an orangutan. Then they scanned bones from farmers living in the same geographic region 6,000 years later. The density had dropped dramatically. The joints were lighter, more porous, more susceptible to fracture. The team published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Their conclusion was uncomfortable. Our skeletons over the last 10,000 years have not been getting stronger. They have been getting weaker. And the turning point, the exact moment the data shows bone quality beginning its long fall, is the moment we invented agriculture. We have spent 10,000 years building civilization. And somewhere in that process, without meaning to, we also built a version of ourselves that is physically smaller, structurally more fragile, and by multiple skeletal measures, less healthy than the people who came before us. Think about that the next time someone tells you we're the most advanced humans who ever lived. Here's the paradox. Every story we tell about human history is a story of improvement. Better tools, better medicine, longer lives, more food, more safety. The agricultural revolution is treated as the foundational step, the moment humans stopped being at the mercy of the natural world and started controlling it. Farming meant surplus. Surplus meant population growth. Population growth meant cities, writing, science, and everything that followed. And all of that is true. It happened exactly that way. But underneath the story of agricultural triumph, the skeletons tell a different story entirely. A quieter story. One about what the body gives up when the mind gets what it wants. The question isn't whether the agricultural revolution was good for humanity as a species. It clearly was. We went from a few million scattered foragers to 8 billion people in permanent settlements. The question is whether it was good for any individual human body, because those are not the same question. And for most of the 10,000 years between the first farmers and the Industrial Revolution, the answer written in bone and tooth and skull appears to be no. The Cambridge study, led by Colin Shaw of the university's Phenotypic Adaptability, Variation, and Evolution Research Group, was one of 2 papers published simultaneously in PNAS in December 2014. The second came from a team at George Washington University, led by paleoanthropologist Brian Richmond. Together, they formed the most comprehensive analysis of human skeletal change across deep time that had ever been assembled. Richmond's team analyzed 7 different bones from the upper and lower limb joints across a sample of chimpanzees, orangutans, baboons, early hominin specimens, and modern humans. What they found was that human trabecular bone density, the internal structural lattice of the skeleton, remained roughly stable across 7 million years of hominid evolution. Through every environmental pressure, every migration, every dietary shift across the entire span of human prehistory, the skeleton held its density. Then, roughly 12,000 years ago, at the start of the Holocene epoch, it collapsed, not gradually, not in a slow drift over millions of years. In geological terms, almost overnight. Shaw's study sharpened the picture further. He compared the hip joints of 2 foraging populations and 2 agricultural populations from what is now Illinois. The foragers, from roughly 7,000 years ago, had hip joint bone strength comparable to great apes. The farmers, from 700 years ago, had significantly lighter bones, weaker by every structural measure. The difference wasn't genetic. The populations were from the same region. What had changed was how they spent their days. And the height data is just as stark. A study published in PNAS in 2022, led by researchers at Trinity College Dublin and the University of Vienna, analyzed osteological and ancient DNA data from 167 prehistoric European individuals spanning 38,000 years, from the Upper Paleolithic to the Iron Age. The finding: early farmers from the Neolithic were shorter than expected by an average of 3.82 centimeters compared to their pre-agricultural predecessors, even after controlling for genetic factors. Their DNA predicted they should have been taller. They weren't, because their environment was stunting them. Wikipedia's summary of the Neolithic Revolution, citing multiple ethnological and archaeological studies, puts the European height collapse in precise numbers. Before agriculture, European men averaged 178 centimeters, 5 feet 10 inches. After the agricultural transition, that average dropped to 165 centimeters. 13 centimeters gone, lost not in battle, not to disease, but to the act of settling down and growing wheat. It would take until the 20th century for European average height to return to pre-Neolithic levels. Here's what most people don't realize. The height and bone loss weren't caused by what people were eating. They were caused by what people stopped doing. The intuitive assumption is that the health collapse after agriculture must be a dietary story. Less protein, more grain, nutritional deficiency, and diet was part of it. Strontium isotope analysis of Neolithic teeth shows a sharp increase in dental caries, cavities from the shift to carbohydrate-heavy grain diets. Bioarchaeologist Amanda Mummert at Emory University, who led a 2011 global review of health during the agricultural transition published in the journal Economics and Human Biology, found that in 19 out of 21 societies studied, societies on different continents growing different crops in completely unrelated civilizations, the shift to agriculture produced the same pattern: declining height, increasing dental disease, rising bone markers of nutritional stress and infection. But the Cambridge bone density data pointed somewhere more specific. Shaw's team found that the changes in trabecular density were not correlated primarily with diet. They were correlated with mechanical loading, with how hard and how often the skeleton was being physically stressed. Foragers walked between 15 and 20 kilometers a day. They climbed, carried, ran, dug, and lifted across varied terrain in ways that placed continuous, intense, multi-directional stress on every bone in their bodies. Bone responds to stress by growing denser. Remove the stress, and the bone retreats. And here's where it gets strange. Shaw's team found that the most physically active people alive today, competitive athletes, marathon runners, construction workers, still do not reach the baseline bone density of a typical Paleolithic hunter-gatherer. The gap is too large. Our lives, even at their most physically demanding, are not demanding enough to rebuild what our skeletons lost. Colin Shaw said it plainly. Contemporary humans live in a cultural and technological milieu incompatible with our evolutionary adaptations. There's 7 million years of hominid evolution geared towards action and physical activity for survival, but it's only in the last, say, 50 to 100 years that we've been so sedentary, dangerously so. 7 million years versus 100, not even close. In the collections of the Natural History Museum in London, there is a femur, a thigh bone, catalogued as belonging to Cro-Magnon I, one of the earliest anatomically modern Europeans, who died approximately 28,000 years ago in what is now the Dordogne region of France. He was found in 1868 by construction workers excavating a railway line near the village of Les Aisies. His bones had been preserved almost perfectly in a limestone rock shelter. Physical anthropologists who have examined his skeleton describe a man who stood approximately 176 centimeters tall, just over 5 feet 9 inches, with a bone structure so robust that the technical term used in the literature is hyper-robust. His femoral shaft was thicker than that of most modern men. His brow ridges were prominent. His muscle attachment points, the places on bone where tendons anchor, were so large and pronounced that researchers can read from them a lifetime of extreme physical exertion, pulling, throwing, climbing, walking terrain that no living population regularly walks today. He died, the bone pathology suggests, somewhere in his early to mid-40s, old for his time, exceptionally healthy by the skeletal record. No evidence of malnutrition, no evidence of the linear enamel hypoplasia, the growth arrest lines baked into tooth enamel that appear so frequently in early agricultural populations as signatures of childhood starvation. He never planted a field. He never owned anything that couldn't be carried. He didn't live past his 40s, and his bones were stronger than yours. This matters beyond archaeology because the body hasn't caught up. Brian Richmond's finding that bone density collapsed at the start of the Holocene and has not recovered isn't just a fact about ancient people. It's a fact about you, right now, sitting wherever you're sitting reading this. The World Health Organization estimates that osteoporosis currently affects approximately 200 million people worldwide. 1 in 3 women over 50 will experience an osteoporotic fracture. 1 in 5 men. The standard medical explanation involves calcium, vitamin D, hormonal changes, all real factors. But the Cambridge data suggests that the deeper structural problem, the reason modern human skeletons are fragile in ways that ancient human skeletons were not, is mechanical. We are not loading our bones enough. We never have been, not in any meaningful ancestral sense, since the day the first farmers set down their spears and picked up a hoe. There is also the question of diet's second effect, not just on bone, but on disease. When populations around the world shifted to grain-based agriculture, they clustered into dense settlements for the first time. Density breeds contagion. The first epidemics, smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, cholera, are diseases of agricultural civilization. They require population density to sustain transmission chains. Your Paleolithic ancestor, walking 20 kilometers a day through a low-density landscape with a group of 30 to 50 people, was extraordinarily unlikely to encounter a pandemic. The first farmer, sleeping in a village next to domesticated animals and contaminated water, was not. Evolutionary anthropologist Herman Pontzer at Duke University, who has spent years studying the Hadza, one of the last hunter-gatherer populations still living in Tanzania, has found that despite walking enormous distances daily and doing intensive physical work, the Hadza burn roughly the same number of calories as sedentary office workers in the United States. Their bodies have adapted to be efficient. What hasn't adapted, what the data shows still runs on a Paleolithic template, is their skeleton. Their bones are denser than those of matched Western populations by a significant margin. Not because they eat differently, Pontzer argues, but because they move continuously, in ways that load every bone in their body, every day, across a full lifetime. We built agriculture to escape the physical demands of the Paleolithic, and what we didn't realize for most of the 10,000 years since is that those demands were the thing keeping us structurally intact. Somewhere in the Dordogne, 28,000 years ago, a man with bones denser than yours tracked something through a landscape that no longer exists, using a body that modern medicine cannot replicate and modern life cannot maintain. He never had a doctor. He never took a supplement. He walked until the terrain changed, and the terrain was always changing. He didn't know he was healthy. He didn't have a word for it. He just was. Because the world he lived in demanded it. Every day, without negotiation, we built a world that doesn't demand it anymore. And the skeletons keep the score.